Summer 1939. A golden age of exploration and archaeology is coming to an end. It was an era that saw adventurers set out to explore the remotest corners of the globe in search of clues to unlock our ancient past. And it was during that last summer of peace, as the world stood on the precipice of a war that threatened to end civilization itself, that three extraordinary treasures were discovered. Treasures that would radically change our understanding of the origins and diversity of human culture.
That made this stone the oldest datable artwork ever found in the Americas.
And bring us closer to our distant past.
You scared me!
In this series, I'll be on the trail of a cast of remarkable archaeologists, each a product of their era. From a self-taught amateur,
Everybody's pressuring him to get to the treasure.
to a pair of charismatic adventurers.
We have come upon the hiding place of a unique group of early American heroic sculpture.
And an academic driven by a dark political agenda.
But here in writing, he's acknowledging this figure.
They're fascinating tales of intuition, eccentricity, and luck.
I can't believe it. And now the lost colossal head.
Each show how archaeology was enlisted into the promotion of very different worldviews. And yet each is a powerful reminder of our shared humanity.
To me, it is just an astonishing work of art.
In this episode, I've come to Mexico, where just before the outbreak of war, stunning examples of Mesoamerican art began to emerge from the jungle.
Who was the enigmatic man portrayed here, and when was it made?
These remarkable colossal heads heralded the discovery of a lost world.
We are talking a city. That is enough for a city.
A major city.
That is amazing.
It was a culture that turned out to be larger and more magnificent than anyone could have imagined.
Nothing like this had ever been found in the Americas before.
These were the vestiges of an entire civilization. A civilization that today takes its place among the very oldest found anywhere in the world.
Hola. Romeo. Muchas gracias. Right in here. Oh, it's wobbly.
My starting point is the state of Veracruz. I'm following in the footsteps of two of America's greatest pre-war archaeologists, husband and wife team, Matthew and Marion Sterling. In 1939, as Europe hunkered down to war, American explorers were still free to set out to make new discoveries. And the Sterlings made the biggest find imaginable: an entire ancient civilization called the Olmec. They built the very first pyramids, palaces, and planned cities for which Central America is now so famous. Over 3,000 years ago, at the same time as ancient Egypt, the Olmecs flourished here. And for some, they are the mother culture of Mesoamerica, from which the more famous Mayans and Aztecs are later descended. But incredibly, when Matthew and Marion arrived here at the end of the 1930s, no one even knew the Olmec culture had ever existed. It was all still hidden, waiting to be revealed. The Sterlings had first been lured to Mexico by the tantalizing story of a 19th century workman who'd uncovered a mysterious giant stone head buried deep in the jungle.
If the stories were true, if the colossal head was still there, Matthew Sterling was convinced that such an unusual sculpture had to be part of a much larger archaeological site, and that it was well worth investigating further.
And if there was a bigger discovery to be made, Matthew Stirling was certainly the man to do it. By the time he arrived in Mexico, Stirling was already an esteemed archaeologist. As a child in California, he'd spent time digging up Native American arrowheads in the desert. And by his late 20s, he was leading huge expeditions to study remote tribes in Papua New Guinea, rising to become chief of the Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology. 16 years his junior, as a girl, Marion was outgoing and adventurous. Her father had always told her she should have been a boy. But like many girls back then, she trained as a secretary. When a chance to work with Matthew Stirling came up, she looked up the word ethnology, thought it sounded exciting, and jumped in. They fell in love and married in 1933. Not content to live in Matthew's shadow, by the time they came to Mexico in 1939, Marion had made herself indispensable in the field.
This is remote backcountry, this part of Mexico. If you follow us on this trip, don't look for road markings. Through long sections, you will see no people, and often you will find the roads little more than trails.
After an epic journey, culminating in an 8-hour trek on horseback, the Stirlings' inaugural expedition finally arrived at the small Mexican village of Tres Zapotes, where it was said the giant head had been seen. Retracing their journey, even today, it's a remote place for me to get to, never mind 80 years ago. So it's easy to imagine their delight when they quickly located a large stone crown projecting from the soil. The legend appeared to be true. What they uncovered was unlike anything they'd seen before. A single colossal stone head buried deep in the ground. The Stirlings didn't know it yet, but they'd taken the first step in discovering the lost civilization of the Olmec.
And here he is, a 6-foot-high, 8-ton colossal head, carved from a single boulder of volcanic basalt rock. Nothing like this had ever been found in the Americas before. The nearest equivalent would be the monumental figures of ancient Egypt. But when the Stirlings excavated the head, there was no torso attached. Instead, it was sat on a foundation of unworked stone, which suggests that from its very inception, it was intended as an intimidating, powerful portrait.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, excavating the head from the jungle was incredibly tough. The Stirlings were hit by 3 tropical rainstorms, which filled the ditch around the head with water. Draining it was a 2-day job every time.
You really get a sense of the individual here. He's quite severe looking. He has this furrow in his brow as if he's contemplating. You've got this broad nose, strong lips, and wide chiseled jaw, all framed by this helmet with the straps coming round, suggesting authority. Matthew Stirling described this as one of the major art objects of the New World, exceptional for the realism of its treatment. But who was the enigmatic man portrayed here? What does he represent? Who created this? And when was it made?
The Stirlings were determined to make their mark on history by solving these mysteries. But there was little to go on, because the colossal stone head bore little resemblance to the monuments of any known Mesoamerican cultures. When the Spanish conquistadors first landed on the coast of Mexico in 1519, they overthrew the Aztec Empire that had dominated the region for 200 years. And before the Aztecs were the Mayans, who reigned supreme from around 250 to 900 AD. But earlier than this, the archaeological consensus in the 1930s was that nothing resembling a major civilization had previously existed in Mesoamerica. But what the Sterlings found next would change everything. Matthew had realized that the colossal head was in fact surrounded by a series of mysterious mounds. And so the Sterlings quickly assembled a large crew of local workers and began to excavate.
The discovery of this monument, Stela C, was, I think, probably the point at which the Sterlings felt they had hit the jackpot. This was so significant because it gave a date. What you can see in this central band here are lines and dots that relate to the Mayan calendar, known as the long count calendar. Each line and each dot creating a date working backwards. Now, Marion worked out that it gave a date of around 478 AD. This was significant. It put it at the height of what was then thought to be the earliest civilization in the Americas, the Mayans.
But infuriatingly, the top half of the monument was broken off, frustrating the Sterlings' attempts to calculate an accurate date.
Matthew was convinced that he could make out one more circle right here at the crack. He went back, interrogated it again and again. Is it there? Is it not? It's really hard to make out. And Marion had another go at calculating the date with that circle taken into account. The date she came up with? 31 BC. That made this stone the oldest datable artwork ever found in the Americas.
The dating of 31 BC meant this was a culture too old to be classed as Mayan, and yet it was sophisticated enough to use calendars. It was tantalizing evidence that a previously unknown advanced culture had existed here, at the very same time that ancient Rome was becoming a superpower. But as the Sterlings returned home to report the exciting news of a possible lost civilization, they found a modern world being dragged into the abyss. The rise of the Nazis in Europe was something Matthew and Marion had seen firsthand. When attending the 1936 Olympics together in Berlin, they'd been shocked by the crowd's frenzied response to Hitler and the ominous display of German power. And when the Second World War erupted in September 1939, it came just a few weeks after reports of the Sterlings' finds were first published, inevitably overshadowing the scale of their discoveries. But in fact, their finds were even more significant than they themselves realized.
Time would tell that the date this stela suggests, 31 BC, was in fact conservative. The Olmec culture that this stone came out of was significantly older.
The Sterlings had opened a new chapter in the story of the Americas. Despite the outbreak of war in Europe and the threat that America might be dragged in too, it wasn't long before the scale of the Sterlings' discoveries was realized. And so, when they returned to Tres Zapotes again in 1940, the esteemed National Geographic magazine pulled out all the stops to support them.
Tres Zapotes, our source of supplies and of labor during the first 2 seasons of archaeological work here in the southern part of the state of Veracruz. Discoveries made a year before have enticed us to return to Tres Zapotes.
Planning more extensive excavations this time, they were accompanied by a larger team, a National Geographic photographer, Dick Stewart, who captured their exploits on film in glorious Technicolor. Even then, the Stirlings were beginning to understand the growing importance of publicity.
Photographer Stewart has a few occupational risks of his own. Here he is on an extemporized man-carrying tripod to get the scene you are next to see. Here is material for a pleasant variation in our diet. The iguana, after being boiled for 2 hours, yields a white meat which has a delicious flavor similar to that of frog's legs.
Marion had been awarded a prestigious prize for her work on the first expedition. But despite this, National Geographic required her to write homely articles about the challenges of jungle housekeeping.
Everything was new to us, not only the archaeology, but the manner of living in palm-thatched homes, as well as making friends with the villagers and learning their customs.
But the life of an archaeological adventurer was riskier than she was letting on. Their camp was built in the bush, but they still needed to visit the village for supplies.
Tres Zapotes also be a dangerous place, not for the faint-hearted. She recalled constant personal feuds and violence between the villagers.
Locals working on the excavations regularly carried guns, and Saturday night parties known as Juanpangos often ended with gunshots and occasionally murder. What's more, the camp was made of huts that served as both homes and laboratories, made of the local style of palm thatch roofs and palm leaf walls. They were infested with ticks, which burrowed relentlessly beneath the skin, gorging on blood and hospitalizing several of the team. Now Matthew had realized Tres Zapotes was a full settlement. The scale of the work was intense.
Here is the cross-section trench that we make through one of the large mounds. We dig down as deep as traces of human habitation can be found. Our excavations are really cross-sections of history.
His goal was to find pottery, simple objects that could reveal more about the people that had made the colossal head found the previous year. And indeed, it was pottery that provided the next major revelation, proving that this culture was clearly distinct from the Mayans, not just an earlier iteration.
A cache of pottery is our first find. Let's try to get it out without injuring it and see what we have. Note the tubes on which the little jaguar stands. They were evidently for axles, which makes the little jaguar archaeologically thrilling. For it has always been supposed that the use of the wheel was unknown in Aboriginal America.
Suddenly, we have a precious glimpse into the everyday lives of these hitherto unknown people.
It's amazing to think that this would have been a toy for entertaining children thousands of years ago. What a lucky child to have something like this.
Another fine example of freehand modeling. In fact, it's one of the best pieces of early American ceramic art ever found. If you ask what all these figurines were for, the answer is that nobody knows.
There were still many more questions than answers. But holding these amazing objects that the Stirlings dug out of the ground 80 years ago, you really feel the excitement of new discovery. Taken together, the colossal head, the early date on the stone calendar, the very first evidence for the wheel in the Americas, and much more besides, what the Stirlings had uncovered so far was beginning to paint a tantalizing picture of a full-blown civilization. But they needed more proof.
Off again now, bound on the journey to the next site.
The Stirlings decided to follow up on rumours of other stone heads found far to the west in a place called La Venta.
Is only 90 miles in an airline. But actually, to go from one place to another is a journey of 900 miles.
It was an arduous trek that took them through dense jungle and along rivers under a scorching Mexican sun.
I mean, it's absolutely beautiful, but it's still really hard going in the heat. Banks are teeming with wildlife, birds and crocodiles.
But it was a journey made on nothing more than hearsay. Over a decade before the Stirling's expeditions, glimpses of another giant stone head were reported at La Venta, in the very heart of Mexico's swampy lowland jungles.
The La Venta archaeological site is curiously located on a sandy island in the great coastal mangrove swamp. Footing it for 2 hours over swampland is the last stage of our trip to the spot where we hope to find the big stone heads of which we have heard exciting rumors.
In fact, what the Stirlings would find at La Venta would far exceed their expectations, and it would provide this unknown civilization with a name. Because although we don't know what they called themselves, the people that lived in this region had been known by the Aztecs as the Olmecs. The Stirlings' first forays into La Venta's dense jungle revealed not just one, but a staggering 4 colossal heads. 3 were found in a row, and 1 all on its own.
How must it have felt? I mean, you're an archaeologist. When these things come out of the ground,
Amazing. And to find 3 of them in a row, more so.
You never know when you start one of these excavations what's going to be revealed. And we begin to feel sure that here at La Venta, we have come upon the hiding place of a unique group of early American heroic sculpture.
La Venta played a major role in characterizing the Olmec.
But what the Stirlings found at La Venta was just the beginning of something much, much bigger. Dr. Rebecca Gonzalez Lauk was the first archaeologist to fully map the La Venta site, picking up from where the Stirlings left off.
This was full of vegetation. It was virgin jungle. At that time, the site was thought to be just a little ceremonial site. And they did not really think that it was a city and that there were outlying sites all around it. As we see it now, the estimates are around 10,000 people that lived in this area.
so we are talking a city. That is enough for a city.
A major city for that time period, yes.
A major city with monumental art.
This head, it's the finest of the 5 colossal heads we have unearthed.
The monument found at Tres Zapotes was a colossal head. But this one from La Venta, one of the first things they uncovered is a work of art. This is the iconography of power. There's a quality to this sculpture that is timeless. It has the proportions of an identifiable, realistic face. This figure looks like he could just open his mouth and speak to us. Done in this realistic style, it suggests the people making them and putting them up have a self-confidence, a self-assurance that comes from knowing they're at the heart of something civilized, something powerful. Indeed, just its very nature, a great big monumental stone carving. That in itself is a way of proving that the wildness, the barbaric wilderness around the city is kept at bay. Here is a human space, a controlled space, a city, which is where we get that word civilization from. It's nature held at bay, nature under the control of man. And when we look in this face, we see someone who is in control.
But in control of what exactly? When the Stirlings arrived here, they would have had little or no idea.
Rebecca, what would this site have looked like when it was at its heyday, its height?
Well, we're standing in the main plaza, and to the north is the main pyramid. This is the earliest earthen pyramid that was built in Mesoamerica.
That is amazing.
It's clay that has been packed. It's rammed, sort of like rammed earth. The most realistic proposal is that it was a step platform with staircases on the 4th side. And that is facing a huge 4-hectare plaza, which you see partially here. Within the plaza, there were some sculptures like Stela II and Colossal Head number 1.
So both those ones we see in reproduction here would have been in the plaza?
Yeah. This plaza, if you were standing here, it goes into this area of vegetation 300 meters.
Wow.
So it's very, very large. How many people can stand here? Thousands.
La Venta can be seen as a blueprint for the later Mesoamerican cities of the Mayans and Aztecs, whose spectacular geometric pyramids and vast plazas still survive today. But many of these designs were first realized here, in clay at La Venta. Evidence that the lost Olmec civilization was perhaps the mother culture of all Mesoamerica.
People thought before the Mayan, it was all sort of like people lived in villages. There were no cities. There was no hierarchy. And so when Matthew and Marian started finding huge sculptures, there was a different perspective. There is nothing like this in Mesoamerica for this time period.
We now have proof that a vast, influential Olmec power center was thriving here from around 900 to 400 BC, hundreds of years earlier than even the Sterlings imagined. To give some perspective, this was the same period that saw ancient Greek civilization taking shape in Europe. And just like the Greeks, the Olmecs used art to project power.
At this point, our excavation reveals the largest stone head which we are to find at La Venta this season.
When Matthew Sterling excavated this head, he recorded finding a fragment right next to it with a reddish purple paint on the surface. So many sculptures from the ancient world and also from the Olmecs were brightly painted, polychromatic. Now we just see the skeleton, the bones. The impression it would have made, not only of scale, but then this vibrant, vivid colour that would have just pinged against the green backdrop of the jungle.
And there's another intriguing aspect to this head. It harnesses the power of the jungle's fiercest predator.
There's wonderful symbolism coming through here of the jaguar, the were-jaguar, you see repeating throughout Olmec art. Here, the paw comes over the top of the head and the claws are really distinctive. They were displaying the wealth and splendor of the Olmec civilization.
But in a world without metal tools, how did the Olmecs create these huge stone sculptures in the first place? The basalt rock from which the sculptures were carved isn't found anywhere near the swamplands of La Venta, but 90 miles away in the foothills of the Tuxtla Mountains. And that's where I'm going next. Without any beasts of burden or functional wheels, we can only imagine how difficult it was for the Olmecs to move giant boulders through dense jungle and swampland. The Sterlings never made it here, but I'm sure they would have been thrilled to know that archaeologist Dr. Alfredo Delgado has uncovered the long-lost sculpture workshops of the Olmecs.
El basalto como un recurso suntuario en medio de pantanos. No hay piedras. Entonces es un recurso escaso y por lo tanto es valioso. 6 meses del año está inundado. Ahorita, como es tiempo de sequía.
Evidence of large-scale Olmec industry is everywhere.
Mira, tenemos un área de desecho de talla. Son varios amontonamientos. Tenemos acá las lascas de cuando estaban tallando los monumentos. Hay 4 áreas de talleres en este sitio.
So as they're sculpting the monuments, these are the big fragments
Sí.
that are chopping off.
Así es.
Amazing. So old. Wow,
Mira, aquí tenemos uno de los monumentos en proceso.
that's amazing.
Y aquí tenemos una estela.
Oh, I can see the
Es un
figure.
personaje.
It's beautiful, so naturalistic.
But Alfredo's latest discovery, here amongst these sweltering rocky outcrops, is an archaeological first.
Mira, esta es una pieza en proceso, es una cabeza colosal. Aquí está la base.
Oh,
Y acá están labrando apenas lo que sería el casco.
so it could have, yeah, I mean, the size, the shape, could be another colossal head.
Es la primera que tenemos in situ.
Uh-huh.
Bueno, son la base de la cabeza colosal, la técnica de martillado y cómo están delineando el casco. La cara todavía no está labrada, apenas están bajando algunas capas para, están esbozando la cabeza, hacer algunos elementos como el casco y la orejera.
Wow, I can't believe it. It is a head, it's amazing.
Sí.
Another lost colossal head.
Sin embargo, en el proceso de tallado descubrieron fracturas y la abandonaron.
Ah, so it had a natural fracture, which meant it wasn't suitable.
Ya no le sirvió y la abandonan.
The basalt rock that the Olmecs used is as hard as granite. Experiments by modern sculptors using stone tools show that each colossal head could take 5 to 10 years to carve. The fact that the Olmec rulers could afford to commission such works and found a way to transport them all the way to La Venta is evidence of their extraordinary wealth and power.
Some of these boulders are 20 tons. How did they physically get the boulders to the cities?
Lo más probable es que las hayan trasladado lo que llamamos nosotros sobre unos lagartos, una especie de horquetas sobre las que se monta la piedra y se arrastra. Debieron utilizar mucha gente, mucha mano de obra. Entonces lo más fácil era que las trasladaran por agua. Y hay una teoría que los monumentos no los llevaban sobre las balsas, sino abajo. ¿Por qué? Porque dentro del agua el peso disminuye.
Even with modern technology, moving such huge monuments is a major challenge, as shown in this 1960s footage of one of the colossal heads in transit to an exhibition in the United States. So why go to such extraordinary lengths? What made these monuments so important to the Olmec?
Olmec sculpture was a form of communication in a civilization that has no writing, and it's a way of transmitting ideas, myths, knowledge, history through the sculptures.
But monumental Olmec sculpture wasn't just limited to the heads.
Those amazing stoneworkers and sculptors seem to have lavished some of their best efforts on the figures associated with their altars.
One of Matthew and Marion's biggest and most unsettling discoveries was how the Olmec united temporal and spiritual power in their ceremonial monuments, giving an unsettling insight into certain Olmec practices.
The finest of our discoveries, indeed one of the finest examples of Aboriginal American sculpture ever found, is this altar.
This is a very different kind of monument to the colossal heads. Like those, it's made of a big lump of basalt, and it's been carved as this three-dimensional sculpture that you have to move around. But its function is different because this is an altar for performing ritual sacrifice of children. At the front, you can see a figure, possibly some sort of high priest, emerging out of what could be a cave. The whole dynamism of this piece is amazing. But it's what's in his hands that's most disturbing, because he's presenting a dead baby.
And the drama only increases as you circle the piece.
Here, you can see the build-up, the procession to death. And it's full of movement. The babies are clinging on, their arms around the shoulders of the high priests. There's a sense of noise, of chaos. It was felt that the tears of the infants were somehow part of the ritual. The more they cried, the more life that would bring to the city. Look at the skull, particularly of that infant over there. You can see it's cleft in the center. That could be an indication of cranial deformation. Perhaps even from birth, when the skull is very soft, these babies are having their skulls shaped for their sacrifice. It's cinematic almost, and it represents civilization and ideology of power. But in what is happening here, we see the barbaric up against the civilized.
Such incredible cruelty is profoundly unsettling. And yet, in the modern era, the very same tension between barbarism and civilization was being played out just as the Sterlings were uncovering the secrets of the Olmecs. In 1941, Japan attacked the US military base of Pearl Harbor, drawing America into the Second World War. In the chaos of conflict, much archaeological work around the world came to an abrupt halt. But not in Mexico, because what the Sterlings had uncovered so far was deemed so important that National Geographic funded a return to La Venta in 1942 to explore an enclosure to the north of the Great Pyramid. They soon discovered strange rows of 2-ton basalt columns, with the stones fitted closely together and deliberately packed with clay. The excavation work was grueling, and yet they were mystified as to what this might represent. To their astonishment, they had unearthed the oldest tomb ever found in Mesoamerica. And as they dug, they found a sarcophagus where ancient bones were laid in brilliant red cinnabar, alongside rare mirrors and masterpieces in jade. This was an extraordinary discovery, and it provided a wealth of new information about the complexity of Olmec society.
This gorgeous little object really is the star of the show. Buried alongside a host of precious objects, but she is something special. She's only 8 centimeters high, carved out of jade, and then the color that you can see there, that rich red, that's been produced by rubbing cinnabar onto the surface. But what makes this really distinctive is what she's holding in her hands. You can just see there a fragment of hematite, a naturally reflective mineral.
In fact, neither hematite, jade, or cinnabar were found in the Olmec region. Everything we see here had to be sourced from elsewhere.
So they are trading to get hold of luxury items that allow them to gaze upon their own face, to see their face, something that we take for granted today. But there's something else going on here too. The mirror is symbolic in a spiritual sense. Mirrors reflect, like the water reflects, but they also can be seen as a sort of portal between the earthly and the spiritual realms. The fact that this has been interred in a burial suggests that it is perhaps acting as some way of transporting the individual onto the afterlife. In a way, its smallness is what makes it so exceptional. The expression on the face,
The delicacy of the carving of the hair, the ears, even the fingers. To me, it is just an astonishing work of art. Compared to the big, ostentatious basalt monuments, these small-scale jade figures offer a very different window onto the Olmec world. Intentionally buried, they reveal a complex culture of sacred rites and ceremonies. This fascinating depiction of a ritual frozen in time is displayed exactly as it was found. A puzzling but privileged glimpse into a long-lost world. Jade was the most precious commodity in the Olmec era, far more valuable than gold. And stunning jade masks also played a major role in Olmec ceremonies.
So this
one,
that would be great, thank you. I'll let you take it.
To learn more, I've come to Jalapa Museum to meet expert Dr. Sara Ladrón de Guevara.
Sarah, what treasures have you brought out for me today?
These are the lovely masks of Arroyo Pesquero. Some are kind of eroded, but this one looks brand new, doesn't it?
It does.
It's beautiful jade or jadeite. And Mesoamericans loved green stones. And that was a very important thing that Olmecs started. And it seems like everything was started by the Olmecs in Mesoamerica, you know? You can see that these masks can fit a face. There are holes for the eyes to see, and there are holes for the nose to breathe.
Yeah.
They could even speak. So it's a usable mask.
Am I allowed to
Sure,
see?
sure.
Oh, how
Be
wonderful.
careful.
I will be extremely
And-
careful.
see?
It's heavy.
It's heavy because it's very hard stone, green stone.
But you can see the shape for the nose in there. You're absolutely right, and
yes.
the mouth. And what we have here are, to me, it looks like 4 maize plants.
Yes.
Very lightly carved on the surface of the jadeite.
Maize is the base of food in Mesoamerica, and it is a sacred thing. There's a god of maize in later times, but it has the beginning in Olmec times.
The Olmec's strength partly depended on cultivating enough maize to feed the large population. So the importance of rituals ensuring a good harvest must have been paramount.
One thing that is very interesting about the masks is that offering 4 from La Venta, I noticed that at least 2 of those figurines are wearing masks. We have the archaeological evidence that masks were used in ceremonies.
So it's very possible that this mask was used in some kind of harvest ritual. But the Olmec didn't just confine their skills as sculptors to large lumps of rock or precious stone like jade. We now know that they were also accomplished wood carvers, thanks to what must be one of the most unlikely archaeological discoveries of recent years. A set of mysterious offerings made to a sacred mountain.
Es algo único. Primera vez que se encontraban esculturas de madera en Mesoamérica.
Preserved wooden objects are incredibly rare in Mexican archaeology. Poc Ortiz was part of the team that first excavated these momentous wooden heads.
That wood's over 3,000
see?
years old.
Artifacts that represented an entirely new era of Olmec art.
Oh, that one's
This
amazing.
se llama Poc.
It's named after you?
I found it. Yes, it's because depende de cada persona que la encontró en el campo. Cada arqueólogo. Él es Alfredo, este soy yo.
It's nice. They're names, not numbers.
Yes,
they're
es-
people.
Sí, es mejor. Escultura 1, escultura 2, escultura 3. 1, 2, 3. I know like this.
I know, like this.
No me gusta eso.
These are really old, aren't they? What date are they?
1200 años antes de Cristo. Es la madera, las esculturas más antiguas encontradas hasta ahora en Mesoamérica. Eso es sorprendente.
Unique conditions at the site of El Manatí, where the heads were found, ensured the unlikely survival of these sculptures. Constant flooding from freshwater springs prevented bacteria from destroying the wood. But they were incredibly fragile.
Hicimos instrumentos de bambú, espátulas de bambú, para ir excavando poco a poco la escultura sin que la dañáramos. Porque el metal, si tú tocas la escultura, se va como si fuera mantequilla. Y ya es permanente.
It's interesting too. I can see some paint, some color.
Sí, varias esculturas tuvieron una máscara bucal, una franja de pintura roja cubriendo la boca y otra negra sobre el rojo.
Around it.
Sí, para dar otra sensación que sobresale la boca, ¿no? No sabemos exactamente qué representaban, pero probablemente a sus jefes o a sus sacerdotes, o también de sus antepasados.
What does it tell us about this really early phase of Olmec civilization?
Nos revela que hubo lugares especiales donde se llevaron los objetos más valiosos como ofrenda al agua, a los manantiales y al cerro mismo.
They're amazing, wonderful discoveries. They feel so human.
These ancient wooden busts were found over 100 miles to the west of La Venta, and just 10 miles south of the last and most important discovery made by Matthew and Marion on their Mexican adventures. But it very nearly didn't happen, and was sparked rather bizarrely by one of Marion's quirkier side projects. Wartime shortages of luxury goods saw her and a Mexican friend set up a business importing crocodile skin handbags into the US.
In 1945, just as the Sterlings were about to fly out of Mexico after another season, Marion received a letter from her friend, mostly concerning their latest accessories order. But in it, her friend also mentioned reports of a hunter who'd ventured deep into a remote part of the jungle and claimed to have seen stone carvings similar to the ones at La Venta.
The prospect of one last romp into uncharted backcountry was impossible to resist, and the Sterlings soon embarked on their final, most grueling jungle journey to date. At times, they became hopelessly lost and disorientated, and even when back on track, were completely unaware that they were heading towards the very first major Olmec settlement. And this is what, or rather who, they found.
Let me introduce you to El Rey, the king. Matthew Sterling said he was the colossal head to end all colossal heads. He's 9.5 feet high and weighs in at over 30 tons. What a handsome whopper. But El Rey isn't just impressive for his size. He's also one of the most beautifully executed of the colossal heads. You can see these gorgeous details, like the line that's drawn around the lips, just giving that extra sense of dimension and definition. He has very human-looking eyes with the eyelids just picked out very gently. And then these impressive ear spools that are almost three-dimensional. You can see they go right through the lobe of the ear. And then there's this wonderfully defined headdress as well, where you can see the individual plumes going over the top. Indeed, the headdress is interesting because you can see this concrete section at the front. When it was discovered, El Rey was flat on his back in a ditch, and that part was broken off. The Sterling's team reattached it. But there's other evidence of damage too. So there are drill holes above the nose, under the eye, and there are axe marks on the side. Matthew speculated that this damage could have been done by marauding conquerors trying to break up this evidence of an ancient civilization. But when they found him simply too big and too tough to destroy, they had to settle for just toppling him over.
This image of Marion, with her hand resting on El Rey's jaw, is one of my favourites, capturing the sheer thrill of archaeological discovery. Including El Rey, the Sterlings found 5 more colossal heads at San Lorenzo. And since their retirement, another 5 have also been unearthed. As a group, they contain some of the finest examples of large-scale Olmec art. True masterpieces, carved by the earliest Olmec sculptors. The Sterling's discovery of this new site of San Lorenzo pushed the birth of civilization in Mesoamerica back yet again to over 3,000 years ago. The scale and riches of the site left a new generation of archaeologists, like Dr. Roberto Luna Gomez, with the exciting task of unraveling the beginnings of the Olmecs.
Why do we have to be careful? What's in the grass?
Because it's the length of first the lance snake here.
Snakes. They will kill you, the boats.
Yeah.
Have you been bitten by snakes?
No.
But it makes the archaeology hard.
Yeah.
Dangerous archaeology.
Matthew and Marion Sterling fueron los primeros arqueólogos profesionales en San Lorenzo. Ellos nos dieron la pauta, las primeras rutas, las primeras ideas para conocer esta compleja civilización. No tenían ni idea del tamaño y la complejidad del sitio. Entre 1800 a 1400 antes de Cristo, casi en forma paralela a la civilización egipcia en otras partes del mundo, los olmecas estaban construyendo una civilización aquí. Para el año 1000 antes de Cristo, los olmecas ya tenían consolidada una verdadera civilización. Y el punto, la gran capital de los olmeca era San Lorenzo, que en su momento fue la capital más grande y más compleja de todo Mesoamérica.
San Lorenzo is before La Venta. It's the first city.
Sí, correcto. La gran capital de San Lorenzo se construyó aquí hace más de 3000 años, llegando a tener una población hasta de 10,000 habitantes, cuya influencia en la iconografía, en el arte, en la cerámica, en otro tipo de innovaciones que ellos produjeron y exportaron, su influencia llegó hasta Sinaloa y al sur, a lugares tan lejanos como Costa Rica.
The latest excavations also revealed an unprecedented construction. Mesoamerica's very first palace.
It's the Red Palace, Palacio Rojo.
But ongoing excavations are backfilled to protect them, so envisaging what lies below the ground requires some imagination.
Aquí, bajo nuestra superficie, lo que podemos encontrar es una unidad habitacional. Tenemos columnas de basalto, tenemos un acueducto serpenteante y también tenemos lo que le da nombre al palacio, que es una estructura de tierra pintada de rojo. Esto nos asume en realidad a pensar que es una zona muy especial.
In fact, deeper excavations suggest the 10 colossal heads of San Lorenzo may once have formed 2 intimidating processional lines leading up towards the Red Palace. Understanding the true meaning of Olmec art and culture has long been frustrated by their apparent lack of a writing system. But a recently discovered object may yet provide the key to unlocking the secrets of the Olmecs.
The world of the Olmecs continues to throw up surprises. I'm lucky to be able to share with you a recent discovery. It was only found in 1999, and this is the first time it's been put on exhibition. Indeed, the first time it's actually been filmed outside of Mexico. The reason it's so significant is all over this surface, there are incised symbols. These symbols are not random. They seem to be forming patterns that suggest a writing system. And if the date is right, this is the oldest written material in the Americas, and indeed the oldest written material in the Western Hemisphere. And the symbols all relate to things that were significant within Olmec culture. So the ones we can make out relate to the maize, or the pineapple, or animal skins. We've even got a symbol that looks like a perforator, this sort of pointed knife that could have been used in rituals, or indeed in sacrifices. There's repetition, phrasing, it could even be poetry, it's been argued.
To me, this slab is powerful evidence that the Olmecs should be as well known as the ancient Egyptians or Greeks. But it also shows that there is so much more to discover.
The Olmecs are the first at everything, and then it all seems to end. Why? What happens to them?
Definitivamente no podemos explicar, es decir, en algún momento la élite dejó de controlar y dejó de integrar a una población muy grande y muy compleja, y esa población no se quedó a morir con sus gobernantes, simplemente se fueron.
So they don't really die, they move and become something else. I like that thought.
We still know so little about the Olmecs compared to the Mayans and Aztecs that came after. The sites first explored by the Sterlings are nowhere near fully excavated. But in rediscovering this extraordinary lost civilization, Matthew and Marion gave us an incredible head start.
Those long-dead artists are having a new day of glory.
Reflecting on their achievements after Matthew died in 1975, Marion wrote that, after Mexico, there were not as many highlights and unusual experiences. Matt and I treasured our years in the field. It was a fabulous life, and I enjoyed every precious second of it with him.
The Sterling's final excavations in Mexico inadvertently brought to life the birthplace, the crucible of Olmec civilization. While ancient Egypt is flourishing, while cities are going up in Mesopotamia, there's now evidence that across the ocean, disconnected from those cultures, another civilization is emerging. And it's a civilization of pioneers, of groundbreakers, of firsts. I think it's fitting that the people who discovered this civilization were also pioneers in archaeology. And what they uncovered has redrawn our understanding of world civilizations.